Good evening, folks. Thank you all for being here for our work session. We have a work session obviously right now, and then we'll, after we complete that, hopefully by 6:30, we will move to regular board meeting. Dr. Phillips.
I'm going to turn it over to Greg Ellis and to Tracy, help me with your last name, I'm so sorry, Richter, and to Brennan Bell to present the update on facilities.
Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I'm going to cover the student yield analysis, and I'm going to start, though. I know that you've seen the enrollment projection already. Ann came last month and did that, but I want to briefly just hit on a couple points, and then I'm going to kind of blow through those slides pretty quickly. But I think to be grounded in some of those things is probably pretty important as we relate to the student yield analysis for you. Of course, we did a live analysis for you, understanding that, you know, as where students live is where we're going to have to plan too. And so the projections go by that, and I think everybody understands where those are. The historical enrollment, I think this piece is important just to see your growth, but I think that the pieces that we really want to concentrate on really start to hit, and I'm actually going to jump way ahead here because I know you've seen most of these, and then the growth by school and the density map that you have. But I think that the two things that we need to really be paying attention to are, first of all, birth data. Although there has been correlation of birth data to kids showing up at kindergarten, one of the things that is occurring, and as you take a look at the numbers, you know, your kindergarten to fifth grade same class cohort is about a cohort survival ratio of about 105% a year. And so you're growing through the elementary years even out of the birth data. And so that initial birth data is a good indicator, but there's some consistency also as you move through that. Now there is a concern with this little blip in 2014, and I'm not sure what happened here, but something happened in 2014 where we see this decline, and it's reflected in your projection. Now, this is going to be important because as we start to look at the yield analysis and potential for students out there, this offsets it a little bit. And it could, unless we see some more in-migration or those cohort survival ratios from kindergarten to fifth grade go above that 105% per year. And so I think this is important, an important piece of data to look at. The next piece is building permit information. And again, building permit information are good indicators of trends that occur. And I think as you look back at this, I think the number to keep in mind here is as you look back in the building permit information is kind of that 2003, 2004 year. Those are big years for building and permitting in the city. Now, that would be a difficult number to sustain over time. And you're going to see why I make that comment. But because in the yield analysis, we're going to look at kind of 5-year historical building permits, 10-year historical, and try to hit some highs and lows to try to estimate when the student yield potential can occur. And that's always a difficult number to hit. And I think that, you know, post-recession, so after this, you know, 2008, 2009, 2010, what we see everywhere, even though we've got some of this post-recession boom of construction happening, is that it's a very conservative movement forward, that trying to go blazing and forward at such a progressive rate oftentimes is seen as very dangerous because you never know when something's going to hit and put us back to that point in 2007 and 2008. And so we're very conservative when we start to look at these things. And so when we do the yield analysis, you can see that in the projected enrollment, I think the big concern for me would be to look at that 2019-20 kindergarten year because that's reflective of that birth year of the blip in 2014. Now, again, the monitoring of that to see what's going to happen will be critical because that influences quite a bit then that year 7 to 10 projection. You know, those first 3 or 4 years you can feel real confident in, I believe, because there's consistency in birth rates, there's consistency in building permits, and there's consistency among the cohort survival over the past 5 or 6 years. And so not too worried about that, but that blip, maybe it's an anomaly. Maybe it's you're never going to get back to that peak number. So I'd like to keep an eye on this. But I think having the student yield analysis actually helps us offset that a little bit.
Was that blip unique to us, or are there other communities that experienced a similar dip?
It actually is unique to you, because what we saw was that we haven't seen those 2004, 2005, 2006 birth rates come back yet, but we have seen consistency. We have seen just a leveling off, and we haven't seen that dip. And so, again, that's an unexplainable phenomenon to me. I'm not sure what happened in the winter. Don't know what happened. I just don't know what's going on in that year. So, maybe it was just a really warm winter. And that happened.
Not much was going on. Actually.
So okay, not much.
Didn't have a storm.
So again, this is and when I see these, because sometimes you see blips in building permit information, sometimes you see a blip in a cohort survival. But a lot of times in the cohort survival blips, I can come up with probably either a policy or a state regulation that changed something to happen for progression. In birth data, it's a wild card. And so again, I'm not so concerned with it, because I think what we've done in the projections, we've modified some of it to give you a little higher projection in some areas and hit that higher projection. And even our moderate projection is a pretty aggressive growth at this rate. So I don't think I'm hugely concerned with it, but I always want to keep an eye on those little ones, those little blips that we see out there. So with that all being said, we continue to see the growth, and I don't think that's any secret out there. But we have models that you have in your reports to show that you're prepared for that moderate to high growth in certain areas. And so the projection, as Ann completed them, Ann and I have spent a lot of time just going through kind of step by step to make sure that we've tried to use all the data we can and eliminate any of those anomalies to keep it pretty stable for you. And but the growth is going to continue, and there's no way to get out of the growth. I think that in that growth projection that you see, that you've got these kids that have come in pretty rapidly in the last 5 or 6 years that aren't leaving for another 6 or 7 years, and so they're going to hold in your projection. And so there's no way to, with the exception of that one birth year, but you do have that leveling off of birth rates, and the permits are starting to climb up. There's not a whole lot of indicators to say that we can slow down growth at this point. Now, what will happen eventually is that you're going to reach some sort of build-out, and you're going to see some probably slowing down of some of that. And as you see that build-out and you see the yield of students that are coming in at that kindergarten grade level, and especially at some of the price points we're seeing in the construction that's happening, it's my guess, and probably a very good guesstimate in the demography world, that at the price point, and if we're going to see that kind of yield at the elementary grade level that you're going to see in a minute, that yield's going to decline for a little bit, because those people are going to hold on to those homes for a while. You're not going to see probably a quick turnover at that price point. And so there's probably this longer duration, which means that if they've got an elementary student in there, that elementary student in 4 or 5 years is going to be a middle and high school student. So that's going to press forward in the yield. And so I think you'll be able to see that here in a second.
Mr. Richter, what exactly do you mean by build out? I think I know what you mean. But
so build out is eventually your infrastructure, and being you're confined into an area that there's nowhere else to go, or and so either your infrastructure will drive that, whether it's roads, sewers, water, all those kind of things, or it can just simply be land, or buildable land. And balancing residential development along with important things of commercial development that you need, and that I'm certain that your city council looks at for balance of tax and all that, there's got to be a certain point where you're going to stop. Now, is that 20, 25 years? I don't know that answer. But with the units that we see for potential, we can see that, that potential could be in that 20, 25 year range. And unless things dramatically slow down. And so, and again, there's always going up. So, but I would anticipate that any build out after that point would have to be multifamily after that point. And so, so again, it's a tough thing to mark, and especially in these times that we've been in such an ebb and flow since the turn of the century, that looking beyond the 4 or 5 year trends is very difficult. We've been through 2 trends already in the first 15 years of this century. And so, and with new administration, new policy, even in the state, what's going to happen with you guys, it's just hard to kind of pinpoint that. But like I said, I'm really confident in these first 5 year numbers, and these going forward, which I think are a good starting point, a good benchmark for you. But I also think that if we get into subdivision yield analysis, the overall process of the subdivision yield analysis is to look at existing residential development and what's there and what's been there, and then looking at student locations and geocoding students to the address match. And you guys have a really high percentage of address match, so that's good news. We did run into a blip of boundaries in this process, and so that slowed us down, and we apologize for that. But I think I'd rather be right than expedient. And so I think that we're really solid in the data now, and moving forward, that's a great benchmark to be at. So as you look at that, we're going to look at, we did a live-attend analysis to kind of see where kids live, where they're attending, and how that's going to be impacted in your future projected enrollment. And we looked at those housing yields by unit type. And you are actually a little bit unique in your yields, and I'm going to show some of that. But also you're very healthy in your student yields per housing. And maybe a little higher than some, not all, but you have a very robust student yield in your housing. So that's a good sign for a school district that we see. So we're going to look at all those, and then we're just going to do, and then it becomes just math. And so as you look at the data out there, simple math tells you that there's almost 14,000 residential units out there. And percentage-wise, about 77%, a little over 3/4 of it, are single-family homes. The multifamily basically constitutes the rest of it. Very few townhomes. And I will, a little spoiler, what happens is that typically what happens is townhomes don't produce any kids. Townhomes are typically, either for early entry buyers or people who don't want to take care of a yard anymore. And so probably not, producing children. That's very common. And it's the case here. So townhomes don't really have a big influence on your student yield analysis. Typically, multifamily housing does soar when it comes to student yield, but it depends on the price point. And it depends on the availability or the type of multifamily housing that there is. I would anticipate yours is a little lower than most for some reason or another, but it's still a very healthy multifamily student yield. And you have a very healthy single-family unit yield in here. But when this all balances out at the end, what we're trying to look at, and you can see on the charts that we have, that, so if you look down here, what we're trying to do down here at the bottom, I don't know if I have a pointer on here or not. I'm sure I'm going to mess up. Oh, got it. So if we look like in this bottom row here, what we're trying to look at are these numbers here in the final yield of things. Now, people anticipate that when you talk about a student yield, people are shocked to find out that houses don't produce one kid a home. They're like, I'm sure that there has to be at least one student per house, and that's simply not the case. When you live in, we anticipate in most districts that 60 or 70% of people don't have students in their homes, and that's pretty typical. But when you look at the student yield across, the student yield on a district-wide level is roughly just over half a student a home. And that's pretty healthy. But as you break that down, you're going to see that you get a bigger yield at the elementary grade level, starts to dwindle at the middle school, and then gets a little bit bigger at the high school. But this makes sense because there's 6 grades at elementary, 3 at middle, and 4 at high school. And so you get just bigger numbers of students in each of those cohorts. But going across there, you can see that every house that you can anticipate on a district-wide currently looks to be about a quarter a student in elementary. For every house built, you can anticipate in the current housing population that you have, about a quarter of an elementary student comes out of each house. Okay? But that's just stagnant. That's looking in today's world. And again, as you get a little further on, you get about 0.1. And it's always between 0.1 and 0.2 for high school and middle school grades. So that one's actually a very typical one. But it's a good, strong elementary one. Again, I think that stands to reason because you've seen the in-migration with the cohort survival of the elementary kids from kindergarten to 5th grade. So if I look forward then, the table shows multifamily housing, and you can see that the multifamily housing yields overall about 0.28. Now this one actually, to me, is a little surprising. I anticipate multifamily to have typically a little bigger student yield out of it. But again, this isn't an alarming number, and in comparison at 20% versus 80% of single family to multifamily, it doesn't sway a whole lot what the overall student yield will be in the district. And so you can see both for the elementary schools. And by townhomes, you can see that even in the townhomes, you get even 0.07 high school per townhome that you have, which is, again, I would expect. And so very, very small student yield. So, new housing. In the new housing, you see, we found 408 units in various stages of progress, 270 multifamily, 138 single family. Now, there are vacant land planned unit developments out there. Typically, and everybody, it's no secret, that's Liberty Park, and there's 1,400 planned unit development there. And so that will tend to have the biggest influence on what you're going to see. And it's probably a good idea, and this analysis does break that out a little bit to kind of separate Liberty Park from the rest of the district, because that can influence a big number. And so what we've tried to do is give, in the methodology of this, we've tried to look at 2 different ways to approach student yield. And so when you're doing that, the student potential out there, and again, the best way to do this is just to explain that student yield averages apply to new housings, calculate your current number going across. Now, we use the projection a little bit to influence this. Okay, this is where they work together. That the student yield analysis can help in the enrollment projection and help us adjust some numbers in there. But we can also look at student projections and historical enrollment to look at student yield too. And so they influence each other. But they're never going to be the same, because they can't be, because of the timing of each of these. You know, the projection that we give you is 10 years. A student yield analysis can go 12, 13, 15, 20 years. And so they're different numbers for a reason. And it really is trying to find where they're going to meet. And that's kind of the secret to both of them. And again, there's no real secret to where it's going to be. And a lot of it will be dependent on things that are out of your control, unfortunately. And so, but when you're looking at these, what we tried to do was we tried to look at 2 different methodologies. The first thing we looked at was price point. Talking to developers out there, the price point, especially in the 1,400 unit development, is at $500,000. Now, folks, that's a big number. And I will tell you that 10 years ago, and when I started this almost 20 years ago now, even a $300,000 house across this country didn't generate kids. And then all of a sudden in 2005, $300,000 houses were generating tons of kids. And then all of a sudden in 2007, it started to go down again. But, the price point in different areas of where people want to live is just determined by that area. And so if it's $500,000, that's fine. But this is what I want you to keep in mind, and this is why that permit information was important. That the sustainability of 1,400 units at that price point for a long term, if you think about that, that's a lot of high-end homes that would have to be built over a long period of time. And so it's going to be hard. And if you look at the permit information to say that, if you're averaging, and you'll see some averages in there, say if you average just 150 a year at 1,400, that's going to take a while to get there. You're going to take 10, 12, 14 years to get there in a build-out for just that unit development. And again, what I become leery of, because everybody has 2007, 2008 in the back of their head still, is that how long is that sustainable? How long is that price point going to be sustainable? And look, my hope is that it is. But again, I'm going to take a conservative approach here for you, because I think that's the right approach. And so as we look at that, but the other thing we want to do is we wanted to look at the overall yield and apply the overall yield too, to kind of give you the balance and see what the difference could be. So if I do that, if I look at the price point, okay, so if I'm looking at the potential, what we're looking at is the potential of roughly in the east-west of about 7 students, and again in the central 2, but in the Liberty Park area, almost 800 K-5 potential that can come out of the 1,400 units based on that price point of the student yield out of that price point. Now, when will the 800 happen? That just goes back to my previous comments about the time it takes to build. And so the potential for that is there, no question. And that's going to have a huge influence. That's 1 or 2 elementary schools, frankly. But when you get there is going to be the key. Now, if I do that then for all K-12, and if I look at the 9-12 and the 6-8, basically you're going to cut both of those in half, which your yield basically tells you. So the student potential in time for, especially in the Liberty Park area, the student potential is somewhere between that 16 and 1700 number for K through 12. And so you can expect that many more students, if it sustains, to be to that price point, or to that student yield and that number that you're going to get. Now, if, though, I look at doing just a straight student yield across in your current condition, you can see that that number drops. You can see the K-5 enrollment will drop to roughly just over 500 students. So if that uses your district average and we see that the other market outside of Liberty Park remains steady, then you could probably back off that 800 number, not quite get to the 500 number, but it's probably closer to 800 than 500 because of the robustness of the number of 1,400 versus the rest of the city and where you're at. Now, if I then include the high schools, the middle schools and high schools in there, you see the total student potential just about doubles. So if you're going by price point or you're going by current status and moving forward, the number is going to be, and again, as much as demographics, I'm still trying to find the demographer who promises exactness, because the tough part here is it's going to be somewhere in that 12 to 1,800 number. Now, again, I lean closer to the 1,800 because of the number of units in that planned unit development versus what it just, so basically what you're going to see is either gentrification or replacement of current housing stock in that other number. And then we just got to see how that maintains over time. And again, if you go back to your building permits, it's never been back to that 210 number that you were. And so the next slide actually shows you that housing permits from the 2011. So if you do an estimated build-out using the 5-year average, it would take 17 years to get to that 1,800 kids in the build-out. Now, keep in mind that you've got a projection already that you've got historical enrollment and birth data that influences too. So you're still going to get that in-migration. And in the report, it's not in the PowerPoint presentation, but what you saw this out-migration, about 11% of students that leave that don't have the same address match year after year, but you're getting a 3% increase, so you get more students that move in than you got moving out. And so you're always going to have, you've established a reputation of a school district that people want to be in. And so at some point they move in. And so that explains that cohort survival over the 100% mark. But what you're going to have is you're going to have the additional influence of new housing over the next few years. And that can influence the projection by some. And we've actually used this number to help us look at certain areas. For instance, if you go back to the projection, we kept a moderate projection across the district. And a moderate projection is a good projection for you in the recommended. However, the Liberty Park area, we went with a high projection in that specific area because of the planned unit developments that we see. And so we favored the high projection there and blended in the moderate projection for the rest of the district in order to get that projection on a district-wide level closer to where we think you're going to be. So I think that all being said, you can see that if you use the estimated build-out using the high year of building in the last 5 years, so which is that 118, so let's say it's 120 a year, it would still be a 13-year build-out. And if you went with the 5-year low, it's 25 years before you see actually the fruition of the planned unit development and the current housing stock and permit. So again, I anticipate that in the current development that you have, that we see in planned unit and any anticipated building out there, that number is probably an achievable number in the 10 to 15 year range. And that is probably on top of your projection too that we can see, although we've modified the projection to grab a lot of this. And what I think it also does, because we've kept that high projection in the Liberty Park area, and the recommended is just slightly above that moderate projection out there. I think we've offset for that blip year in the birth. So I think we're going to be okay. I think, again, I always want to say we want to keep an eye on it, but I think that because of this aggressive growth in building and planned unit development, and not necessarily permitting, but you see the planned unit development out there, I think it just offsets that birth year. And so I think that, again, it's a projection that I think uses the data the correct way and gets you to a pretty accurate number there.
So your earlier slide that had the chart with the projected enrollment, that folds into what you, those numbers have the subdivision yield analysis folded in.
They do, and in a sense, what we've done here, and then this is where the art and the science work together, is that you use that student yield analysis to adjust the cohort survival of that certain area. And so what we may see in Liberty Park, let's say it's 105% over year to year to year in the growth, just in the historical growth with birth data and existing or historical building data. What we've done is we've looked at that and we've said, even though this is what the average has been, we're actually going to bump that cohort survival up, and we can manually do that. And then within our software, and among 1,000 algorithms that I'll never understand, that modifies that projection in there based on the information that we see. And again, the art of this is kind of using that year build out. So being conservative in this, to not say that, the 1,400 units, if it got done in 5 to 7 years, would buck any trend that you've ever seen in the city, frankly. And so we would push it out to be more of that. I'm actually anticipating more close to that 12 to 15 range. And so you can bump your cohort based on that growth and make sure it's modified for that. So that's the art of it. And so when you're looking...
That's as much science.
This is science, because once it's in there, once you get that building permit information in there, and once you get that birth data in there, and once you get the historical enrollment in there, the program is built to get that standard deviation really, really tight. And so, and it will actually buck you out if you want to modify too much on the cohort. So it's not going to let you put 125 in there, for instance. It's going to make sure that it stays within that standard deviation that it deems necessary to get a high, moderate, and low projection. And so I think, like I said, I think they influence it. But I think it is all in there. It's all in there to be considered in the projection.
And I know that even that, there is art to that. But that's as much science as we can get.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And again, once we settled in on the data and got the boundaries right and everything like that, I think there became a huge amount of confidence building in our shop once we got that all sorted and all in place and got it all right. And again, the great part is that it is solid for the years moving forward. So as you revisit this thing and you keep revisiting and to try to see what that building permit information is, and then again looking at that birth data, I think you can be real confident in it. Now, at the end of this, I think that, which goes to explain how these work together, because I think that it gets kind of confusing because people want to see that 1,800 number in your projection, and when your projection is showing roughly 1,200, and it's just not the case. The projection is a 10-year projection, and we certainly don't anticipate that additional 15, 16, 1,800 students in that 10 years. But how they work together is that they do modify each other. They work together to allow us for that to happen. I actually wish in more districts we could do a yield analysis, that not all districts hire us to do both, because I think it helps us get more accurate on projections. And remember that those projections are based on a lot of historical trends, the anticipated stuff that we have. The nice part is that working with the city and working with the developers and talking to them, we became more informed on how to adjust those numbers in the projections. So I think that was very helpful for us in this. And at the end of the day, the yield analysis will look at the student potential. And again, that's what it is. It is a potential of students. And so, again, doesn't take much to drive out there to Liberty Park and see how many basements they're digging every year to kind of just keep that up to date with us. And you can modify your projection to do just that. But I don't think you're going to see, from the projection, I don't think you can see huge swings from the projection. So any questions beyond that?
The subdivision yield analysis that we talked about tonight, did that change much of your thinking from the first report that you gave to us?
I think it did. I think it did, and we made some modification because what we were doing, we went with a little higher than the moderate projection overall. But then when we really saw that planned unit development, it really made us take a second look at just that one big adjustment, and that does adjust the district-wide. So I think it did help us tremendously in this. We would certainly explore those things, but it's interesting when we contact a lot of city contacts across the country, and we ask for demolition numbers, we ask for permit information. A lot of times they just won't provide the planned unit development. But being able to work with your city, because even the city planners, they know what's going on. They know planned unit development before there's planned unit development. And so being able to work with a city like that actually helps us tremendously. Get this.
Well, we appreciate the city working with you. Thank you for that.
Tracy, how
Yes.
often with your other clients do you perform an update annually, semi-annual? How often do you come back?
It depends on your growth model. I'll give you, for
How
instance.
about hours?
I would pay close attention to yours. If it's not every year, every other year. We work with a district just north of us in Columbus. That's Olentangy, which has grown. In 1999 was like the 50th largest school district. Now it's the 4th largest school district in the state. So we do a subdivision yield analysis every year for them, and we've worked with them for about 15 years now. And we can actually show you actual gentrification, almost to the month. It's really crazy. So we do analysis like that with districts like that.
How long have you been working with them?
About 15 years.
And so if you look back at 10 years ago, 15 years ago, how are your projections now that we've moved?
Actually, our projections in the 10-year projection were really good. We took a little hit in the 2000, but not much of a hit up there for some reason, 2007, 2008, but everybody did. But it went like just a firestorm after that. And so our 10-year projection was really good. And what's happening is that our yield analysis has really proven to be accurate because we're to a point where we're, subdivision by subdivision, street by street, price points, age of student, and, gentrification. And I even think they have household income in that district now. So, but that's taken a lot of work to get there. And I'll tell you what, we just did a big boundary process with them. And it's still not easy to convince them they need to do boundaries in a growing district, And so you can have all that data, and it can be really good. And I think people trust that data, but the decisions you make out of that data still aren't always the easiest things to put across to your community.
No, I can't imagine that. Showing people this and talking about rezoning will be an easy conversation.
Those are fun. Those are and that's sarcasm. That's a lot of sarcasm.
So in our first projections that we did for 26, 27 and our various options, we had somewhere close to 8,400. It looks like we've tweaked that down just a little bit.
Just a little bit. I think, and I think that's because I think in that information that we saw, we weren't sure to see the length of time of the build out, the projected build out of the units. And I think that as we did that and did more exploration in it, we were able to modify because of that. And I think there's there might be some prevalent thought out there that this could happen rapidly, but again, I haven't been in a lot of places in the last 3 or 4 years that has maintained a steady, high peak building permit for any sustainable amount of time after the crash. And I just think there's just a more conservative approach. I don't think it's necessarily fair because I still think we're in this building boom again. But I just think people are just taking a more conservative approach to it, and rightfully so.
Well, you would assume too additional supply would decrease scarcity, which ultimately decreases demand, right? So you would assume
Eventually,
that
yeah.
At some point that begins to kind of normalize as you dump additional supply on the market.
It has to. And all those influences like that are exactly right. And as you see that that price point, even in today's $500,000 house, in 5 years isn't a $500,000 house in building because of that very reason. You're not the only people building out there. There's a lot of competitors out there that are vying for population, especially on the outskirts of Birmingham.
These the planned units, they're planned in the sense that they all have projected start dates, or they're just planned that they're in the future?
Yeah, they do have anticipated start dates, but how many permits within that start date really varies. I also think just the internal capacity of the developer probably limits that. I mean, I think some of these big developments like the 1400, you're probably, and I don't know to be the case, but you know, most of them have 2-3 developers within there working together in different units like that, and so it really depends on that. But at some point, builders only have a certain capacity also, and so like I said, to see 150 units go up in a $500,000 subdivision a year, that just doesn't sound like it's feasible. Now again, more power to them if they can, and good for you guys, but that'd be hard to imagine.
So Greg, has the HPM team had a chance to digest Tracy's findings, and if so, how does that impact sort of the options we've had, the enrollment numbers?
So as Tracy has and his team has gone through this process of the original enrollment projection, taking the subdivision yield, modifying the enrollment projections and giving us more complete data, that's allowed us to take that in comparison to the capacity of the existing schools and the plans that are there, and that's informed our projections and how the options have started to narrow from what was on the table to what is on the table now. And I guess it's about time to talk about
That's a good segue.
But
Good segue.
I do feel like, Jerry, the short answer to your question, we couldn't be where we are today with having gone through and been able to analyze the data and how it affects our school system without having done this component. And both of these have very, very much so informed what the decision-making process is going at this point.
So it looks like the projection on slide 8, Tracy, there's like over the next 5 years or so, there's a pretty good little hike here, and then it's flat to slightly increasing over the last 5 years, right?
Right. And
So I just want to make sure that, Greg, that we've,
go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
Greg, I just want to make sure that we've accounted for that in these, sort of this planning that we're doing now, that hike over the next 5 years.
We have.
And I think that, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in looking at 5 years. I think after that, I mean, really, who knows? I mean, this century has proven to us that a 5-year trend is about all you can count on. And so that's why for you guys, I don't think it's necessarily year by year, but it's definitely every 2 years. If you're not looking at this every 2 years, you might fall behind quickly, especially with that. And probably be a good idea next year to see the permit information and that birth data, but to see the plan unit development, see just how aggressive that plan unit development is moving forward. And then I think if you can get there, I think then you can be on a kind of a biannual basis of projection.
Thank you.
David needs to remember that.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tracy.
All right. So, Brendan,
Clicker.
No. Switch this.
we need to switch the presentation.
Jen.
This one. Just keep going.
Here we go. All right, magic.
Merging PDFs, the best, man. High tech.
So I appreciate it. You guys have heard from Brennan for the last several months, and he's gone through very detailed presentations with you. So again, I'm responsible for all of our planning, pre-construction, design management, coordination efforts on the very front ends of programs. So tonight I wanted to kind of recap where we are to date, talk about where we are in terms of funding, look at each of the options. We've spent a lot of time since our last meeting working with Greg to go through operational expenses for each of the individual options that we have on the table, and give you just kind of some additional information, no more options, but additional information to clarify kind of the points of where we are today, answer some of the questions that came out of our last meeting. So to start, I wanted to give a big picture update on kind of budget, and how, where we are to date in the program. So, as you can see on our slide here, net proceeds of the bond issuance are approximately $73.5 million. And the general fund reserve dollars that were attributed in addition to that were approximately $18.5, giving us a total funds available to look at this program for $92 million. From that $92 million, there has been some expenses to date, debt payoffs, land purchase at Berry and Cahaba Heights, some miscellaneous expenses, closing of the bond, a few other.
Payment of Raymond James and maybe standards and floors, those different issuance costs associated with the bonds.
Right. And then the direct construction and design expenses to date for the projects that are underway that you've seen around town, Liberty Park, et cetera. So the total of expenses to this point in time are $41,400,000, which means we have approximately $50,600,000 remaining funds available to complete this program.
And so the 18.5 is basically cash that we had over the years built up and that we're using for these projects, right?
Correct. That is our surplus that we have generated in our general fund source of revenues over the last 17 years or so that we have accumulated. And I will say even at that level, it still leaves us with a healthy reserve if we spend all of that, at least a 2-month operating reserve.
And the state requires
1 month.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So, using that information and looking at the 4 options, and let me just briefly kind of update what those are. Option 1 is a K3-4-5 elementary alignment, as we have right now along the 31 corridor. It does not change Cahaba Heights or Liberty Park in terms of the elementary. It's a 6-8 middle school, introduction of an academy proposed at Central, and the current high school stays at a 9-12 alignment. Option 2 looks at K5 at the elementary across our system, 6-8 for middle school, introduction of an academy, and 9-12 as the high school. Option 3 takes away the academy, looks at a K3-4-5 along the 31 corridor, remains the same for Cahaba Heights and Liberty Park, 6-9 for proposed at Berry and at Liberty Park, and a 10-12 high school at the current high school campus. Option 4 is a K5 alignment across the system, transitioning to 6-9 for Berry and Liberty Park, introducing back in the academy proposed at Central, and a 10-12 at the current high school. So as we've looked at these options, we've put numbers together. Option 1, 54.8. Option 2 is 54.8 in terms of the cost to complete those programs. Option 3 is 61.5 and option 4 is 65.6. If you subtract the expenses incurred to date for current projects underway, that leaves us anywhere from 43.3 on option 1 and 2 to 50 million remaining and 54.1 remaining for option 4. If you look at that in comparison to the funds remaining that we had looked at in the last slide of 50,600,000, you can see the over-under delta of where we would stand. So for options 1 and 2, that means we would have projected an under budget of 7.3 million versus the total 92 million that's been on the table to begin with. For option 3, there would be about a $600,000 to the positive, and option 4 looks like there would be a deficit of about $3.5 million.
Deficit meaning
we would need more funds.
Short.
Yes, correct. With the plan as it's currently evaluated.
And that's just construction costs?
That's,
Or
yes.
program. It's not operational?
No.
costs? No.
So the next slide talks a little bit about our general fund performance, and I would like Greg to kind of give a little bit of overview of how it's trended over the last couple of years.
All right, this goes back and begins with the 2013 fiscal year. This data was pulled from the audited financial statements. And you can see going on the revenue line, we have had a constant increase in revenue for all those years. Correspondingly, we have also had expenditures go up for each of those years. But the important factor is that if you go to excess revenues over expenditures, we have finished each year adding money to our reserve, meaning that we have had more revenue than expenditures. So we have been able to build up our reserve, and we are keeping our expenditures under control, and we have good growth in the ad valorem, which helps fund our revenues.
So the other thing to note on this slide is, since our last meeting, we were asked to look at operational costs for each of the four options. Pure operating expenses of the facilities, transportation costs that may be included in different options depending on what was going on, some startup expenses for what it would be to be starting a new academies program, etc. So as we go further, we'll look at those individually, but as a whole, those range between 1.7 and 2.7 annually for what annual operating expense cost would be.
So, Greg, you're saying that under those various scenarios, 1 through 4, they will add additional expenditure ranging from 1.7 to 2.7, depending on which one
That's
is
correct.
determined. But the bottom line is we don't have 1.7 to 2.7 excess.
Today, we do not. Correct.
Okay.
Greg, I know we've looked at some potential opportunities there.
Well, part of it is, again, we have the historic growth in ad valorem. I can point out that for this current year, it appears we're going to have $1.2 million growth in ad valorem for this year. We have the Jefferson County sales tax money, which all the legal proceedings have been cleared on it. Within the next few years, we should start to collect that. That's another $1.2 million that will be coming in.
Per year?
Yes.
Per year?
Per year.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's not a one-time, this will be an ongoing. And, as more commercial developments take place in Vestavia Hills, it will keep increasing that ad valorem. The other thing is, as we get into each of the budget years that will be affected by whatever option is selected, we'll look for opportunities in the budget to save money, and those costs are truly projected. It depends upon what the configurations are, what some courses are that are offered. We won't know what the actual personnel costs are until we get into it. But the short of it is, with, let's say, if we were to hit an immediate 2.7 million increase in operating cost, it would basically be funded out of the general fund reserve for probably 2 years. Growth would have increased by then to take over. There would be excess growth after that point to basically repay the general fund reserve back for when we pulled that money out to cover it for the startup.
But looking at that, Greg, each year the increase in revenue looks to be about this, well, the expenditures seem to be increasing at about the same pace, right?
Right.
So if we have a $1 million increase in ad valorem on the top line, do you expect a $1 million or some subset of that increase on the expenditure side?
Not necessarily. We have at one point had growth in ad valorem as high as 8%, and our expenditure growth would be in the 2 to 3% range. Due to housing bubble burst and some things that have happened with state funding. We really don't have a clear trend on that at this point, but we would not necessarily have a direct correlation of increase in revenue to increase in expenditures.
And patchwork, yeah, hasn't yet factored into that either, right? All the ad valorem.
I mean, there are a limited number of projects that I have factored in on a growth scenario that we looked at some time back from information provided by the city. But again, as these commercial projects come online, they are assessed at 20% of their value. Homes are assessed at only 10%, so we collect twice the ad valorem out of commercial projects. And there aren't any kids that go with commercial projects.
So the short-term gap plan would be reserves. The long-term gap plan would be ad valorem growth plus the sales tax that was just released by the Supreme Court.
Right.
And are you pretty confident that that just the operational costs are doable? Does that make you nervous at all, or you feel like it's?
Well, as an accountant, it does.
Never ask an accountant if he's nervous about something.
Not as a Board of Education.
But yes, I think it is. I think it is doable. And like I said, it may require funding it for a year or so out of the reserve as this happens. But also, this isn't going to happen overnight with the different construction options that are out there or the amount of construction involved in any of the options. This would phase in over a number of years, so by the time the full effect of the total operating cost increases out there, there's a good chance, I feel like, the ad valorem revenue would have caught up to it by that time.
Brennan, remind me the build out, the timeline, how many years to complete? Just the basic stuff that we have.
Essentially, it'd be 2 more years to get very fully developed and that build out, and then with any of our options, you're kind of moving over that summer from Pizzitz to Berry, from any of these central to Pizzitz, however they would shake out.
So the 2019-20 school year.
Yeah, well, that's good. It makes a difference.
Okay, so moving on a little bit, kind of coming from the 50,000 foot to maybe about the 30,000 foot. We wanted to go back and talk a little bit more in detail about each specific option. Not to go back through and look at growth and alignment and, capacities, et cetera. We've touched on that many times. The data that we've received from Tracy, the information that we've factored into that, it is much more solid. It has not changed. So what you saw in our last presentation hasn't changed the projected capacities and enrollments for these schools. What I would like to talk about, though, are some of the pros and cons. So for option 1, with the current elementary alignment along 31, introducing an academy facility and having a 9 through 12, at this point, the pro of not having any rezoning is there. We continue to move forward with life as we know it today. The issue is we have an unbalanced alignment in our elementary schools across the system. We have 3 schools that are operated in one fashion. We have 2 schools that are operating in a completely different fashion. There is a big benefit in terms of the cost. This one obviously is $7+ million under our funds available right now. The downside of that is it doesn't fully address what we believe is the high school growth coming over the next several years. This does have an advantage of introducing a new program and many new programs in the academies. One thing I'll look at a little bit later in specific terms in terms of the academies is the cost component versus the growth of those academies and the investment value per student that I think you'll be able to look at there. Operationally, this is, annually about a $1.7 million annual expense to the system. Option 2, essentially the building components, the design components are the same as option 1. Those really don't change fundamentally. The big difference here is this begins to address an option to align the elementaries across the system at K-5. It does help us with enrollment and being able to balance the capacity versus the enrollment, etc. But this option, and I'm sorry, this says no rezoning. It actually should say rezoning. This actually would require some rezoning along the 31 corridor. It would not affect Cahaba Heights, and it would not affect Liberty Park. As far as the high school growth, it's still a similar situation as option 1. It doesn't fully address our growth at the high school, and the cost versus growth discussion for the academies we've got to look at. So as you've seen in option 1 and option 2, the issue is that they don't fully address the high school growth for having 9 through 12 at the current high school campus. And we've been asked to look a little bit further on how that could potentially be solved. How could we make Vestavia High School 9 through 12 for the foreseeable future and come up with a solution to solve that? It's not an easy solution. Bottom line is it's not. The issues that we have at the high school of adding approximately 1,000 students to that campus over the next 10 years, based on the information we've studied with Tracy's company, it would require approximately 150,000 square feet of additional non-traditional and classroom space to be able to address physically the growth and addition of that many students over time. Parking, as we all know at the high school campus, is a very congested situation as it stands today. As we look at the layout of the land, we've studied it with Rick over the last several weeks and months, to be honest with you, looking at various ways to do it. We have 2 very large parking lots right in front of our school. Those are really the best places to build if you're going to build and expand this current high school. So the proposal here obviously can't happen all at one time. You can't build parking and a new addition and do the necessary, additions to the athletic to accommodate the growth in students and the number of people there. It would be a phased approach. So if you're taking away parking to put a new building, you have to have another place to put parking in the short term before you can add more parking in the long term. So we've gone through this, we've run some preliminary cost. Essentially, this would be a $50+ million over and above anything else we've looked at to date to solve our growth at the high school for a 9 through 12 campus going forward.
So we're going to take out the tennis courts with surface parking?
Let's talk about that for a minute. Right now, the tennis courts are not board property. Those are owned by the city. So there would have to be a negotiation with the city. We would have to have a land swap or a purchase of that property, etc. We need to identify a place for those tennis courts to be replaced. There's very limited space on this campus to replace them. There's about 5 acres just above where the farthest parking lot is. We're not showing putting tennis courts there because truly that's an uphill climb. So the excavation cost to put tennis courts in that location would be dramatic in this plan. So the likelihood is the tennis courts would have to go to another campus or another location. The pros of this, let's talk about that. Well, let me step back for a second. There's also about a $900,000 additional per year operational cost, and then we've got to figure out what the,
That doesn't include debt service though, does it?
excuse me?
Does that include debt service, that $900,000?
No, that includes, it's 50,000 square feet plus another 53,000 square feet in the athletic wing for what our heating, cooling, custodial costs
Purely
is.
operational, no
Operational.
Correct.
Right. So what this solution would answer, obviously the growth at the high school that we anticipate. It keeps our alignment the way it is today. Whether we do a K-5 or a K-3, it doesn't really affect this, but it keeps our 9-12 traditional high school as it is on this campus. But it also is an opportunity. We've talked about the challenges of the high school as it is in its current state, where the cafeteria, the media center, the hallways, other non-traditional classroom spaces, this gives us an opportunity to affect those and make some upgrades and dramatic improvements.
Fine arts, those kinds of things.
The difficulties of this plan, cost being the first one. I can't say that one enough. When you look at this site, because of a phased plan, you can't do everything at one time. This construction period would last a long time. The traffic congestion to do this, the student safety concerns that would be related to this, both in the first term of the actual construction period, but the densification of this site adds additional safety concerns for this site. You have more blind corners, you have more issues to have to deal with. This is a challenging site to have to deal with from a safety perspective. And the final one is the requirement to negotiate with the city for additional property. We've been successful in some areas so far. They've been a very cooperative partner. I would trust that they could be a very cooperative partner going forward, but this is another site where we would have to have some cooperation with the city to be able to negotiate for potential property that we don't currently have in our ownership.
Greg, if we look at Tracy's numbers under the moderate chart for projected enrollment at the high school just for 5 years, Tracy, to your point about after 5 years it becomes a little grayer.
Right.
But 5 years, we go to 2,622 kids at the high school. If all those kids were at the high school, and even with the addition of a 3-story building and athletic construction as well, would there have to be changes to the, for lack of a better word, the common areas, the lunchroom, library?
Yeah, so, obviously this is still a very conceptual plan. Final floor plans and exactly how everything works together is not completely solved. But in talking with Rick and with Sean, going through kind of the gymnastics of how this could be done, as we look at this, when I say it's an opportunity to improve and upgrade non-traditional, this 150 would give us the opportunity to make some of those areas, band and fine arts and other things, reside here, and then go back into the existing spaces, convert those to classrooms, to other uses that could add additional space capacity interior to the school.
And that would be included in the $50 million.
That's anticipated as part of this phasing and logistics plan, and that's part of the premium that you have to deal with of, just building exterior as an add-on to the school doesn't completely answer that you still have to go back interior. And does that happen during the summer? And is that a premium to do that over a summer, et cetera? So there's premiums associated with that. And then just the escalation of construction cost over time, that's a factor that we have to look at, and we've anticipated that in these numbers.
Mark, where'd you get your 2,600 from?
At least this is 2022, 2023 school year.
Is it 20? Okay, it's sort of nets, but I think it's, well, this is next year, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I was looking at 24-20 as 5 years out. That's the reason I was
Yeah. He was saying 5 years out, it's 24-20.
Okay.
So
That
not
first
quite
column is
2,600.
Yeah.
Is that
That's what I'm
Is that what
thinking
you're
of.
looking
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
And I
understood
may
what
be
we're
looking
doing.
at older projections from you, Tracy.
I think what you just count on, and this is the easy way to remember it, you're about 500 students per class right now. In 5 years, you're going to be at 600 per class.
Yeah.
That's probably a real easy way to look at it.
Okay.
So Greg, are the student safety issues almost exclusively around the traffic and the?
It's largely around that. Anytime you're adding on and you're, kind of coming off at angles and things like that, you do introduce some blind corners. Students in a parking deck is an untraditional solution. It's an out-of-the-box answer to our unique campus situation here.
But not any other security issues that?
No. Nothing dramatic, just things that we have to plan for and think about if this is an option that merits consideration.
Have you ever seen anyone sell the naming rights to their high school, like Coca-Cola High School or Axe Body Spray High School or something like
No.
What's the name of your company?
that? Just saying, I'm like,
Tracy could probably answer for some Far West. We have experience in Texas with school systems there that there have been stadiums
this is true.
with naming rights and major donors.
How many spaces do we have right now, parking spaces?
That's 100.
Folks, it's
Yeah.
6:30, and I'm assuming that Sheila, is it okay with you and okay with you all, just to continue on with the work session? Are the folks coming, Sheila, for the meeting at 6:30?
Not this evening.
Okay.
Okay, so I can
Keep
pick
going.
up the
Yeah,
pace
keep
too.
going.
Sorry. Okay, so looking at that leads us into that was a solution that how do we solve a 9 through 12 campus at the current high school, which leads us to where options 3 and 4 came up from, which is how do we look at the high school campus along with elementary and middle school. And option 3, as we've discussed many times in the past, it's approximately $61.5 million. But this concept looks at, with the Berry property coming into the system, adding a 9th grade wing for the students that would come through the 31 corridor. So students that come out of Pizitz right now and move into the high school, their 9th grade experience would be at Berry. Students that come through Cahaba Heights and Liberty Park, their 9th grade experience would be at Liberty Park. We would rejoin at the high school in 10th grade. This sufficiently pulls out enough students when you also add in, this actually doesn't add in, option 4 adds in the academy, I'm sorry. But this answers how to offset the anticipated growth in the high school, but free up capacity at the high school. So operationally, it's about a $2.2 million annual expense. It does address system-wide growth at every level across the system from kindergarten through 12th grade. It relieves the congestion at the high school. This option would preserve Central. This would take it offline effectively at the end of this plan. This would preserve the Central campus for future uses yet to be completely defined if an academy program didn't go in with this option. It also looks at keeping the option open to align your elementary schools, whether it's K3, 4, 5 along 31, or whether it's K5 across the system. It doesn't change the building and construction program at the elementary. This gives you the option and the flexibility to look at that as a possibility in the future. It is a more expensive option than options 1 and 2, but it does address more of the issues than those 2 options do. So as we move forward, option 4, and we've talked about this one again, this is our most expensive option at $65.6. Operationally, it is going to present a $2.7 million projected annual expense for operations. This maintains the 6-9 alignment that we just discussed of how to address the 9th grade and relieve the congestion at the high school. This, however, recommends that we go ahead and make the move to K5 across the system. And we introduce the academy program at Central to further reduce the congestion and the capacity issues that we're dealing with at the high school. It would require rezoning. We do have, alignment that gets balanced throughout this, so there's a lot of good. There's some issues that we still have to deal with. It will be changed. It will be changed. The final slide that I wanted to look at, and I've kind of talked about this, it discusses, we've gone back and forth several times over the last couple of months talking about the academies. And I think Sheila and others have done a good job of trying to explain how the academy program would develop, whether that's science and math, whether that's robotics, fine arts, culinary arts, etc. Those programs, some may exist, some may be things that could be expanded upon, some that would be completely new to our system. But what we really need to look at is how quickly do we think those would grow? And if you've noticed over the last couple of months, we started at a % of students that we thought would be, something that we could pull out. We've gotten a little bit more conservative. We've pulled that back to about a 10% factor at this point. Over the next 10 years, what you have to look at is a $5 million capital investment, putting dollars in to renovate the central school. It needs it. We all know that. Having an annual operating expense and startup expenses that Greg's looked at for how would we get this up and running would be about a $500,000 annual cost. The reality is we're only affecting somewhere between 200 and 300 students over potentially a 10-year period of time. If it doesn't grow beyond that 10%, pulling students and growing it beyond what that projection looks like. So what we have to look at here is, yes, it does offset the high school growth. It helps us with those capacity issues. It does introduce new programs that may not exist in our system right now. It allows us an opportunity to utilize the central facility in a way that it hasn't been utilized before, keep it in the system, keep it up and running. But the downside of that is the cost versus the opportunity to grow this and the challenges that will be associated with growing an academy over the next several years. It's an unknown. So is it the best and wisest investment to put $5 million into this facility versus the time period that it may take to grow these programs? Is it the best utilization of that space? These programs probably would not take up the entire footprint of that facility. So some of that facility may be unused for a period of time, which still has to be maintained, still has to be operated, etc. So I say that just to give you the information of what we have been looking at. So at this point, anything that I've talked on, anything that I've touched on, I'm welcome to answer any questions, and Brennan's here as well if you have any questions.
Any questions of the board, and then we'll open it up if anybody out there has questions.
Can you go back one slide, Greg?
Option 4, that's the one you want.
Were you about to say something?
Yeah. So we started going down this road with as many options as we thought were reasonable and feasible, and we've narrowed it down as we've gone along, and maybe narrowed it some more tonight. But I wonder if we could think about another possible option, which would be a modification to number 4.
Okay.
Where we, took a look at the academy, and while it's something we would love to do, want to do it, need to do it, maybe we park that to the side for right now and just go with option 4, removing the academy from that proposal. And that would make up for the shortfall in the program cost versus the funding that's available, and maybe make that a little bit more attractive as an option to us. So I don't know, what are thoughts about that?
Is that a dollar for dollar reduction if you do that?
Yes.
Take the $5 million out.
Takes your 5 million.
Yeah, we've isolated those as we've developed the budget, so we know exactly.
And the 900,000, is that a dollar for dollar reduction on the operational as well?
I believe so, yes, Greg. That's been factored in, but school by school, option by option.
So it basically would be a merge of option 3 and 4.
Yeah.
So we would take
So if you
simple
take-
offline and
you know, if you hold Central in queue for future use and take academies off, then take the $5 million off. That's $1.5 million to the good on option 4.
That's right.
With a facility queued up for some other purpose, if academies is the right answer, or if some other answer presents itself at some future time.
It gives the flexibility of time to fully investigate the academic side of it, to know how attractive academy program would be before investing those dollars. Yes.
Other questions?
My preference is not to part with Central. We're landlocked over here, and even if it's in poor condition, I'd prefer to maintain the operational cost so that if we need it at some point in the future, it's there. Because we can't replace it.
Yeah, and there's covenants on what it can be used for. We can't just do, sell
One
it
thing
to
in
do
these
anything.
figures where it says we take Central offline, I did not budget in any corresponding decrease in board operation costs for that, realizing that building is going to have to be maintained with heating, air conditioning, and some level of custodial service. So that is still in the overall operations for the board as a whole. I did not budget a reduction for that.
So the OpEx for Central is baked in it whether it's online or not.
Right.
Okay.
So you're saying it's protect, the land use is restricted, like the park was? The entire campus?
Mr. Boone's
Sure.
looking into exactly what that,
So it can
It
only
Looks
has
like
to be
for
used
us, so
for
you can't-
educational purposes is one of the covenants on it. So he's checking.
he's giving us that information.
Is it still an option to, we were just going to say, moving the board offices to Central and giving this building for the east or west? Is that still an option? Is that?
It is still an option, it certainly is. And, you know, what we know is that if we build, if we renovate this building and the discussions that we've have had as of late versus a brand-new wing at West, even that is going to be a cost reduction that might make sense, and then that would allow that to be a possible option for us. Yeah, it could.
And Greg, to that point, on
Yes.
the costs under these 4 options, looking at the changes to Vestavia West, were the numbers used for those options the numbers for the additional wing, or was it using the possibility of using our space here?
Yeah, so looking at all of these options, we have anticipated that the cost projected to build an additional wing is $3 million more, roughly, than what these options show. So we have assumed at this point, right, wrong, or indifferent, that this facility would be repurposed for additional classrooms
Gotcha.
at West. We have gone ahead and vetted a temporary home for the board, inclusive of looking at relocation, move costs, the timing of the logistics of that. We have a move management group within our firm that works with corporate clients and school systems and universities. That is all they do. So they came in over the last couple of weeks to help us vet that opportunity. We've looked with Rick and Sean of opportunities and places where that solution could happen. And
The city may have rental space there.
They're talking.
Thank you.
yeah,
How much, do you know
So-
how much
Rental
square
space
feet
free
that
of
is?
charge.
Do you know how much square feet this space
It's
is?
100,000. Oh, I'm sorry, no, 10,000.
10,000, okay.
The entire building.
How much square feet, how much storage do we have in this building?
But
Seven or eight. It's about
The city
8,000.
will let us like sort of squat there for a few years.
About the life of the chamber.
Yeah.
Everybody wants your free space, I get it.
And I
But
know this was asked and answered, but one more time for the record.
Sure.
Like, all of these are good for all of this.
Correct.
Unless something crazy changes, whatever, but normal, all the stuff that you said, controlling the variables out, we should not have a discussion around overcrowding in the 10-year period if all of this holds true and we execute on any of these. Okay.
The short answer to
Is this
your-
on?
The short answer is
That's right.
The short answer is yes.
Okay.
All right, questions from folks? Yes, ma'am.
if we do option 3 or 4 and 9th grade is moved toward a middle school format, I'm curious, related to the band, like the marching band, to JV sports, to things like that, will we be moving 9th graders back and forth for these different activities, or will they be cut out of those activities?
To protect the programs that we have in place, I've had at least 3 meetings with Mr. Horton. I've met with the middle school folks. Well, I'm going to say I've met with one of the middle schools, and the other one, Kim Bain has shared her information with me without us actually being able to even hook up face-to-face. But I know where she stands on that. I've met with Jarrell, met with Jeff Seegers, with the athletic department. I've talked to Tyler. They've all talked with coaches. When we went into this, the whole discussion from the very beginning, and you can go back to the very beginning of the public forums that I had, one of the main commitments is to maintain our programs. We are not interested in isolating the 9th grade out or changing the structure of their involvement at the middle school or junior high level, whatever we land on, but protecting the programs at the same time. One of the phrases that I've used is get as much bang for our buck, make this happen. Somebody wise said, cast the net as far as you can, and then as you have to reel it in. And based on the commitment to our programs, we know that we don't want to lose that momentum. So how do you make that happen? There may be some transportation back and forth. There may be some shifts in when they practice, what surface they practice on, those kinds of things. But this actually, if we can think like that, increases the opportunities for us. It shouldn't decrease and pigeonhole. Now it's a matter of scheduling and all of those things, the logistics piece of that. There absolutely has to be a commitment to that. We've talked about, not that this is what you brought up, but even if we had the possibility of rezoning, if that was something that we chose to do, we've talked about the fact that there'd have to be some sort of grandfathering in to make that process as the transition of that as smooth as possible for our families. You don't take a 2nd grader and say, oh, by the way, we're redrawing this line, so now you get to make a whole new set of friends here. We know what the impact on our students would be like that. So it has to be. Now, will it mean some change in some way? And we have to think creatively. Absolutely, that is what we have to do. But when you come down to a numbers game, and the fact, I'll use band because you brought that up. The current facility that they are in isn't what we expect them to be in. It's not at all conducive to the number of students that participate or the growth of the program itself. So how do you create that environment? By removing students or whatever, and being able to redesign those spaces or moving those locations and making that happen so that you get the best of both. And that would be our commitment. At least it would be my commitment. And we've all talked about this. Those are key. Calling them on one of the slides even non-traditional spaces. That's very strategic. A lot of times we talk about the non-instructional spaces, which is your cafeteria, which you want to talk about a challenge, it would be to expand the cafeteria at the high school because it's an interior space. So how would you redesign that being interior, which goes back to cost projection and all of those timing and all of those kinds of things as well. So, one of the greatest concerns is how do you keep programs as they are and the value that we have in them all and the success with which they have. And then at the same time, how do you ensure if we remove the 9th grade from the high school, how do you ensure that they'd have those same experiences? We've just had that discussion at the middle school. That ownership's on me. That ownership is on us to make certain that we create experiences that are more aligned, more closely related than they are different. And we've been saying that all along. And I can say that all day long. The proof has to be in the pudding. But that's why we're saying it all publicly we also know our community holds us accountable to it. So, and that's okay. That's how it should be.
Do you stay as a 7A school if you take the 9th graders out, or does that?
Yes. Well, you would, because it's based on, it's 10 and 11 for the last 2 years, or is it 10, 11, and 12 for the last 2 years? But we wouldn't change. The current discussion has been we would still include our 9th graders in these programs as they are. It's a matter of logistics of getting them there, what time they would practice, where they would be, the location of it, not restructuring the grade level in that way. That would not be our intent at all.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Has there been a discussion about putting all the ninth graders together wherever it is to make that logistic easier? And I'm not trying to shortchange anybody, but just as far as the ease of equalizing programming across the board, transportation issues, if we're talking about taking them off campus and having to bring them back to the high school, has that been a discussion?
It was.
Yes, and it was quite a heated discussion at that. Yes. It was from both angles, in many angles, actually. Liberty Park coming to the Berry camp, moving ninth grade to the Berry campus, Liberty Park coming over. There was very strong opinion there. There's pretty significant opposition to doing such because of its location and getting to it and those kinds of things. Although you can ask it, you're going to get a different answer depending upon who you ask, what time it is, and how it goes. Again, the reason why I talked to Jarrell 3 times, because we talked initially, it was like, what? And the fine arts department, and then, ooh, wait, this may help us do some other things, and then we're back to a little bit of, okay, what is this really going to mean to us and the commitment to it? So yes, it has. Not only that, but do we look at a ninth grade academy? The research has been done there, taking a look at other school systems, not only within our state, but across the nation, that have gone to an isolated ninth grade academy, which is not a favorable situation. As you can imagine, that just allows ninth graders to be really odd for that much longer. And we could get into more discussion about that, but yes, we certainly have.
Hoover tried the ninth, is my recollection, Hoover tried the ninth grade and then folded them back in.
That is correct. There are some again, the conversation at the time in the work session that we discussed that, or maybe we did it in an update, I can't even remember at this time, where this, you can go out and you can find them designed in many different ways. A ninth grade academy that is strictly across the street. We actually talked about that. Do you take the parking lot across the street and build a ninth grade academy there? But again, the whole issue is about space being conducive to the growth we know that we are going to continue to have at the high school. And it isn't even just about high numbers or large class sizes in English, math, science, and history. It is all the other spaces that we know that are just as important in holding all of that together, and how do you make that happen. So yes, we have. If anybody has another idea that we haven't thought of for ninth grade, I don't know. I mean, originally we even talked about, do you make it a different experience at the 12th grade level? Well, you want to talk about shaking some folks up. You talk about giving a different experience for seniors. We all know they check out shortly after Christmas, right?
Our crew haven't checked out, have they? They're fully engaged, right, Jerry?
Liar, liar. Yeah, whatever. So, yes. Yeah, we've vetted that.
Was transportation the main issue with bringing, and the only reason I say the Berry campus is because we have more space there. Would it be a feasible option to look at, I know we don't bus, but something like that with ninth and Berries that don't drive?
Well, we've talked about that. That's part of the conversation about that. Again, we're asking parents in the Liberty Park area, if we do that at Berry, to put the kids on a bus, for a significant amount of time during the day, and you can get opinions that vary, some that would, some that wouldn't.
I grew up in a system that bused everybody, so that to me,
sure.
Not having buses here really is a
sure.
concept. So.
Well, and it isn't just about the busing either. There, and understandably so, students who are driving, going from Liberty Park to Columbiana, it's another drive, it's a different drive, and
Okay.
there's sensitivity to that.
Okay.
And I understand
Fine,
that.
so I
No, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. We'll adjourn the work session, and then let's take a 5-minute break.
So is the plan, we're going to, what is the plan?
Next steps.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad you asked.
It's all the closure.
Yeah, thank you.
So we decide when to be on the road.
You all digest all of this? Oh, you'll be here. April 26th, right? 26th, yes.
I won't be. That's all.
Yeah, you will. No.
I told Coleman I don't have to ride the bus there.
Beyond the school trip, I know, is that you all digest all of this. We talk about any questions, we put it back to, we revisit, and then we narrow this down, and I make a recommendation to you on the 26th about, okay, where are we? I don't think that, I've told many groups, no apologies that it's taken this long. It should, because this is incredibly important.
Probably no work session before the meeting on the 26th. We'll just
We have
play
to-
by ear.
I thought we had to have a work session. I think we have a work session
Okay.
scheduled.
Do it, okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
I did have a question about the option. I don't remember all the details on the changes to elementary schools, but is there a concern with Vestavia East or West being too high for the current capacity?
Yeah, yes, in terms of the growth at both of those schools and where they're, yeah, Greg, you want to talk about that? Kind of
Sure.
what it looks like at East and West?
Sure. So we covered that in a couple of different meetings, but essentially at West, we need to add approximately 11, 12 additional classroom spaces to accommodate the future growth in enrollment here. At East, when the cafeteria is completed, that's currently under construction, the current cafeteria would be repurposed and adding additionally 4 classrooms interior to that school to address current growth.
So both of those campuses could be increased without moving the campuses to another location?
They will not be relocated.
Okay.
Now, the third component to that equation is Bezits becoming an elementary school, whether it is 4 or 5 in the central alignment or whether it becomes a K-5 school. So in any of the options that look at K3, 4, 5, or K5, the additions that we are planning on at West and East address the future growth, and Bezits turns into an elementary school.
Okay, that leads me to my next question about the options. I understand you get pushback from Liberty Park residents about moving 8th grade over to any location. But was there an option that was considered where we would have 8th and 9th grade at Berry with Vestavia High as 10th, 11th, and 12th? And then that way Bezits could still remain with 6th and 7th.
We looked at, I believe, that option very, very early on, and the issue was we would have to keep Central as an elementary school option, and in order to do that, the renovation cost over and above what you're seeing at the academy conversion was significant for that facility.
Okay, so Central was an issue.
Yeah, it became a limiting factor for that discussion. Yes.
Central is probably an issue that runs through, it's a thread that runs through all these options.
Everything on just 31.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
But
I think Marion has a tear in her eye.
I went to high school that was split up.
Folks.
So I know there's some concerns about having a split high school like that, but I went to Central at Tuscaloosa in the 90s. We had around 2,500 students in 9 through 12, but we had 9th and 10th at one campus and 11th and 12th at the other. And the way they scheduled everything were band and athletics were always the last period of the day. So all the students that needed to be bussed over were bussed over for just the last period of the day.
But what if you do both? I have kids that do both.
Well, but
We might have only had a handful that did. And so what they did is usually the athletics practice after school and band was in the last period. But depending on the sport, and if the sport was in season, that sport might practice in the last period. Otherwise, the athletes would be doing homework or something.
And like Sheila said, those are the details that will, if this option is to have a 9th grade at Berry and a 9th grade stay at Liberty Park, there are going to be details that will need to be worked out to address the legitimate and very valid concerns about how programmatically does this work and work best. Because again, we've had so much success as a system over the years in so many different areas. We want to make sure we try to set the stage for that success continue to grow.
and I can answer that further
Sorry.
when we break.
Okay.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and go into our board meeting. You see the, and again, specially called meeting, you see the agenda for tonight. Is there a motion to approve that?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion about it? All in favor? Aye. And we've seen the minutes for our March 22nd meeting as well. Is there a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Dr. Coombs?
Consent items. I recommend that the board approve the following consent items: out-of-state and overnight trips. And that's all I have on that list.
Dr. Phillips has made this recommendation concerning consent items. Someone have a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Sweetwater, Tennessee is
Can we approve
approved.
all but one?
No. There's a personal investment in Sweetwater, Tennessee.
Could be the trip of a lifetime.
Could be.
All in favor?
New business. Item 5A, I recommend that the board approve the elementary instructional coach job description as submitted.
You've heard Sheila's recommendation concerning this job description. Is there a motion to approve that?
Second.
Any questions or discussion?
Yes.
Yes, please.
The discussion would be this, is that as personnel are going to impact, and we've done this many times, where we've taken a job description that we have and we've revised it to be current. This was a fairly outdated job description that we had previously. It didn't really match. It was more focused on the reading and then some things that really no longer were necessary to be in there. So this has been updated and revised, and the other impact of this is that as the State Department is currently making changes and having discussion about how they want to deal with instructional coaches or reading coaches, math coaches, those kinds of things. The financial piece of it was just time. We needed to do it for multiple reasons, and that's what this is on here for.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Item 6, personnel. I recommend that the board approve the following personnel actions: retirements, resignations, reassignments, transfers, a leave of absence, and employments, please.
Sheila's made this recommendation concerning personnel. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Superintendent updates. There is not a work session prior to the April 26th board meeting. We will need to have one in May, and we will also need to have one in June. But we will not have, possibly one in June, but we don't have to have one at the April 26th meeting. And that's really all I have.
What is
am I
the May
leaving
meeting,
out?
Sheila?
May 17th. It's a week before graduation, so
It
we'll
is.
we'll do a work session beginning at 5, primarily for Sheila's evaluation, and then regular meeting at 6 o'clock.
That's correct.
Is
And
that your last meeting?
That is my last meeting.
David, we need to talk.
Nancy and Lisa, be nice.
We need you to bring a pillowcase with your last name written across the top in Sharpie, put it on your head so we can hate you accordingly.
I don't have
No
anything
other-
else.
Okay, open it up for the public for any comment about any of the agenda items for tonight's meeting. All right, thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Love it.